This is the most eccentric man I have ever seen. When he was reincarnated, the god said he could grant him any wish. For example, teleportation or killing with a single punch. As long as Jack could think of it, the god could make it happen. But unexpectedly, Jack only wanted to farm, and the more desolate the place, the better. This had always been Jack's dream, because he had suffered from an incurable disease since childhood. After enduring torment, he eventually passed away. But since he now had a second life, he wanted to farm in a sparsely populated place, and spend this life leisurely. As soon as he said this, the god was completely stunned. He had never seen such a bizarre wish.
ダメですか。
いや、農業は管轄が別でね。
管轄。
だが掛け合ってみよう。あ、わかった。
So after obtaining the farming god's permission, the god first granted Jack a body immune to all diseases. Then he gave Jack a tool that could transform at will, just by imagining it. The next step was the reincarnation ritual. When Jack woke up again, he found himself lying in a deserted forest. Then Jack tried moving his body, because his previous life had been spent lying in a hospital bed. This feeling of standing up made Jack extremely excited. After his joy, Jack took out the god's gift, the universal farming tool, and began his first plowing. Because the tool had divine power, swinging it consumed no energy. Even the hardest soil would turn exceptionally soft when plowed. However, this was not the time to celebrate, because the problems of water and food were still unresolved. Moreover, this was another world. Thinking he might encounter wild beasts, Jack decided to find a safe place to stay first. After exploring a bit, Jack soon arrived at an open area, because there was a tall, thick tree in the center, which could serve as a landmark. As for the water problem, Jack decided to dig a well himself. He turned the universal farming tool into a shovel, and started digging right on the spot. Since it didn't consume energy, Jack quickly dug a deep pit. But then he was dumbfounded, because if he kept digging, he wouldn't be able to get out. After some thought, Jack decided to dig at an angle instead. Perhaps blessed by the god, he actually managed to dig out water. After securing the water source, Jack planned to clear the surrounding obstacles. After all, this place would eventually become farmland. Then he turned the tool into an axe, although he had never chopped a tree before. In his impression, you should chop one side first, then chop the other side, so the tree would fall in the desired direction.
よし。まずはこっちから。よいしょ。
Jack never expected the god's tool to have such power, but since the tree had already fallen, the next step was processing. The process went very smoothly. Cutting the tree was as easy as slicing vegetables, and using the tool to carry the wood was effortless. Soon Jack had processed a pile of lumber, just enough to build a small cabin. But looking at the reflection of the wood, Jack suddenly realized it was getting dark. In his excitement, he had forgotten he had nothing for lighting, so he tried to summon a flashlight and matches, but unfortunately, nothing happened. Finally, Jack had a sudden idea. He managed to produce a magnifying glass, but by then, the sun had already set. Jack had no choice but to first dig a tree hollow to spend the night. Perhaps because of the two moons in the sky, even at night here, visibility was still good, so Jack used the moonlight to make a set of wooden utensils with a file. When the next day came, Jack's first task was to start a fire with the magnifying glass. Then he cleared the area around his base again. Although using the tool didn't consume energy, he still couldn't avoid hunger. Just when Jack didn't know what to do, a rabbit suddenly darted out of the forest. In a panic, Jack swung his hoe and killed the rabbit. But shockingly, the rabbit's head turned into a pile of soil. Fortunately, the other parts were edible, but when people eat, they need to defecate. Jack didn't hesitate about this. He immediately set to work making a toilet, and whether it was storage, ventilation, or cleaning, it had all the necessary functions. However, when he actually used it, Jack realized he had overlooked the issue of privacy, so he decisively added panels around it. Now the house wasn't built yet, but the toilet was already finished. After everything was ready, Jack could finally farm with peace of mind. While working diligently, Jack also decided what he needed to plant. However, it was only then that Jack suddenly realized he didn't have any seeds at all. But since it was already late, Jack decided to return to the tree hollow to rest. But when he woke up the next day, he was stunned. Unexpectedly, the universal farming tool actually had another magical function. That was, while farming, as long as he imagined the crops he wanted to plant in his mind, seedlings would sprout even without seeds, and their growth speed was even faster than usual. In this way, the problem of obtaining food was perfectly solved. Next, to prevent the farmland from being destroyed by wild animals, Jack built a fence around the farmland, then dug a deep pit outside the fence. Although it couldn't guarantee absolute safety, it was still better than nothing. A few days later, Jack's farmland began to take shape. During this time, he relied on the rabbits that wandered into the fields to satisfy his hunger. Under Jack's careful care, the crops grew a lot, and Jack finally built his own small wooden house. Although he lacked materials, he solved it by stacking grooves. The roof was made of tree bark, fixed with wooden nails. But since one person's strength wasn't enough, the house couldn't be built too high. He had no choice but to dig down the floor inside the house to increase space. Although it was somewhat simple, it was still much better than the tree hollow. Just as Jack's farming life was getting on track, two uninvited guests arrived outside the base. They were two wild wolves that looked very much like dogs, covered in scars. After sensing they had no hostility, Jack let them in and fed them some wild boar meat. Because Jack had loved raising dogs since childhood, he especially hoped they would stay. At this moment, Jack discovered the pregnant female wolf seemed seemed about to give birth. Seeing this, Jack gave them his house, and thoughtfully lit a fire at the door, while he himself returned to the tree hollow to spend the night. The next day, when Jack checked again, he saw that the female wolf had successfully given birth to 4 pups. To replenish the female wolf's nutrition, Jack specially took 2 pieces of premium wild boar meat, perhaps sensing Jack's kindness. After giving birth, they had no intention of leaving. They completely treated the cabin as their own den, so Jack built another house next to it. The second time, he was more experienced, and conveniently expanded the area. Days passed like this, one after another. The crops finally ushered in a harvest. The first to ripen were tomatoes. Although they looked small, the taste hadn't changed. During this time, the 2 little ones also helped hunt beasts, or patrolled around. Everyone got along very well. Jack also gave them names. The male was called Xiao Hei, Little Black. The female was called Xiao Shui, Little Snow. The little ones were simply called 1, 2, 3, and 4. And while Jack was developing his base, in a certain restaurant, a young girl, ignoring all dissuasion, was preparing to head to the forest where Jack was.
ちょうどいいかもね。